Good evening, everybody. This is Stephanie, and I'm back with some more addiction conversation. So now that we kind of explained a little bit about the working definition, continued use despite negative consequences, the different stages of addiction, stage one, a little bit more mild, stage two and three, a little bit more moderate, high moderate, stage four being severe. And then ultimately, how drugs take a salient value and hijack the brain into believing that, it is the answer when clearly it's problematic. And that ultimately, with, cessation of use and building a recovery, we can recalibrate our brain back into, healthier mechanisms of thinking and that sort of thing. Let's talk a little bit about what addiction does to the family system and ultimately recognizing the term like how addiction is a family disease and it's also a systemic issue. Recognizing how the system as a whole affects every individual person in that family, and every individual in that family affects the system. And ultimately, how that looks in an addicted family system. So everything in this world is interrelated, right? System is something that is like this interdependence aspect where interrelationships create systems, and all these systems are made up of several parts working together to achieve a goal. And so, like, if we're looking at a family, let's say there's a mom and a dad and two kids, the dog, the white picket fence, etc. Oftentimes, we each have our own part that we play to get through the days, to show each other love, to get to work, into school, to sporting events, and to other fun things, achieve our own desires, maybe graduate from high school or get the promotion, those types of things. All of that takes all of us together to work together to achieve these desired outcomes, these goals that we have set. When we introduce addiction into a family system, people in the family are still interdependent and interrelated and are working together towards that goal. In a healthy family, a goal is always balance and harmony, right? That is the goal. We don't want to be fighting and disruptive and chaotic. The goal is peace, calm, harmony, and togetherness. However, once we introduce something like addiction into this, that goal is affected by that addicted person, right? Because it disrupts, it creates, disingenuous experiences. Maybe there's explosion, maybe there's intense worry, fear about what's going to happen to our addicted loved one, and that sort of thing, which then throws that balance of that family off and has a direct impact in every person in that family and their system, meaning it affects the dad and who he works with and his friends, the mom who she works with, her friends, kids who they go to school with, their teachers, their friends, etc. It spider webs out and has this profound impact on every person that they interact with. And so what happens in this, unhealthy or dysfunctional family or this addicted family is individual family members start shifting their roles and their places around to adapt to keep the balance. Think about it this way. If one of us is sick, let's say mom is sick, oftentimes that family rallies around mom, cooks soup, maybe gives her medicine, lets her sleep, whatever, and takes on additional more responsibilities so she can heal. Once she's healed and well again, she kind of goes back, assumes her roles and that sort of thing. And so each family member, it should have like this fluidity where they can go in and out of those roles. If I'm doing well, I can do more. If I'm not doing well, I can lean on you more. And there's this balance in that. With addiction, however, there isn't that balance, because then the one person, the addicted loved one, becomes kind of that centered person. And so then we kind of get stuck in these different places to maintain that balance. So then that way it doesn't upset the apple cart. This new toxin has been introduced to the system, and now we're just kind of like writhing in it. So how do we get better and well? The system is more powerful than the individual within that family. And so think about it this way. If I were to pluck a Colorado deer and drop it off in Canada, that deer is going to do its deer thing here as it does in Canada. However, if I were to pluck you out of Colorado, and let's say in your developmental years, I had you grow up in China, you'd be an entirely different person, because the system in which that we work with has a direct impact on how we're shaped. Those social norms, our even our family norms, and those sort of things have a direct impact on us. There's that nature versus nurture argument, and nature is going to play a role in this. When we're looking at the system, it will define who we are based on how we attach to our family, based on the dynamics of that family, and based on the dysfunction of that family. So addiction does have a profound impact on the entire system and each individual systems outside of that family. Let's talk a little bit about unhealthy dynamics within the family. So anytime that we are looking at a dysfunctional family, we're looking at 3 unspoken rules, right? That don't talk, don't trust, don't feel, which actually very much relates to addiction and is oftentimes in that addictive setting as well. And so ultimately, we don't talk about it. And oftentimes we'll see this like where there's side talk, where I'm not talking exactly to the person, but I'm side talking to another person, or I'm afraid to confront my addicted loved one because in the past it has created such big explosions, or there's been such big pieces that we pussyfoot around, or we're very, very delicate, or we just eventually stop. It's not changing. No matter what I say, it's getting to this pointless place, so don't talk about it. Because of that, then there's all these feelings. The more I stuff emotions down, the more I have a lot to feel about it. When I am stuffing that emotion down, then I have to find some outlet to numb it, whether it's overworking. I myself might start over drinking or overusing, or maybe I'm using avoidance altogether, where I just kind of live in a little bit of a denial place, or find other methods in which I can numb out, so then that way I don't have to feel. Because of this breaks down trust, and not just trust with that I have for my addicted loved one, but also I'm starting to let the trust within myself deteriorate as well. And so because of that, then we can kind of see how those aspects become dysfunctional. Let's take a look a little bit about communication. So one of the bigger ones when we're looking at a dysfunctional family and that addicted system, we're going to notice something that we call triangulation. And it very much like a inverted triangle, right? Where we've got ourselves, our addicted loved one, and then somebody else. Because since I can no longer go to that addicted loved one as a way to meet needs, then I go to a third person. That third person is who now I am venting on to say, like, this is horrible, I'm so scared, or whatever. And then it becomes this more like Hartman's triangle or triangulation, because I can't go to my person directly. And so it's basically communicating it through another family member about a different family member in hopes of getting needs met. And so those tend to be a little bit more of like unhealthy coping communication strategies. That third family member then feels forced to be a part of this triangle and accepts that responsibility for keeping connection between the two family members. It's a hard role. It's the middleman. It's, what do I do here? How do I maintain the peace? Because again, the end goal for all systems is balance and harmony. This can be saturated with distracted listening, judgment, and blaming. Think about the telephone game. The more it goes down the line, the more distorted the message becomes. And oftentimes, the more that it becomes heavier material. So then somebody's going to blow up, or somebody becomes very much at fault or is taking the brunt of the blame, and it's saturated with judgment. And so this often happens where we speak over others and then we speak for others, because if I'm like, well, I can't trust you anyway. You say a lot of things. I don't believe a word you have to say. Or they do love you. They're just struggling right now. You have to be understanding. And so we get into these places where we're either justifying poor behavior or speaking over, and ultimately not being active in listening, not being active in sound, healthy communication aspects. The other thing that comes up a lot is infrequent discussions about self, feelings in these relationships, because of the uncertainty or the fears or the lack of harmony and balance. I might not bring up my needs. I might see that my parents are already struggling and fighting, so I keep it kind of quiet. I just struggle by myself and become a little bit more isolated. And then the reverse can be true, insensitivity, where it's just like, I can't hurt anymore. So now I'm becoming jaded towards what you have to say. And so those are kind of those dysfunctional communication styles. Let's talk a little bit about family cohesion. Essentially the bonding, emotional bonding of family members have toward that they create and build towards each other is influenced by each person. So if you look at like father and daughter's relationship, father and sons, mother and daughters, mother and sons, husband and wife, all of those are going to be kind of built individually and also add to the cohesion of the family. How well do we zipper and marry well, or how disjointed have we become? And so this is going to be really impacted when we introduce a substance or an addiction into that system. It starts breaking down those bonds or breaking down the cohesion of the family. And so it could be very much impacted, or it will be very much impacted. And so it could look disengaged, where essentially it creates no more bonding because of that, like, inharmonious and lack of balance, people can become like very isolated or avoiding their addicted loved one or secrets from them and completely, back away, which often happens when we don't know what else to do. It's like, I've tried everything. I don't know what I can do. So now I'm just going to take 3 giant steps back away, kind of love you from afar. The opposite could be true, where then we become enmeshed. And this is where emotional bonding dominates. And so it's hard in enmeshment, it's hard to differentiate between you and me. I over-assume accountability and responsibility for somebody who very much is responsible for him or herself. And so this is essentially lack of boundaries and over responsibility for everybody or everyone else, shouldering a lot of the weight, taking on a lot of the consequences, and feeling that emotional burden. Then there is separated, which again is not ultimately the goal. Emotional bonding with a little bit more independence. However, it's still pretty disconnected and not all that cohesive. It's guarded. There's clear boundaries, maybe a little bit of fear there, but still secrets and things that are not being attacked. And so the cohesive aspect is still pretty separated. And then last is that connectedness, which is ultimately the level that we want to achieve, where there's good emotional bonding and a good amount of independence, and it kind of has this great balance. Supportive, clear boundaries, respect, and I'm only assuming accountability for myself. And that would ultimately be the cohesive level that we're trying to get to. However, in addiction and addicted systems, we're not going to find that. Flexibility is another huge piece. As said before, like when I was using the analogy of being sick, we want to be able to kind of fluidity or with fluid move in and out of roles. That's kind of what a healthy family does. And we ride out the storms and, ride the highs and, wait out the lows. And we're kind of able to surf those waves of life's happenings because of the flexibility that we have. And so when there's an inability to make changes in those aspects, it definitely starts creating some more system aspects. It could look chaotic where we start breaking down leadership, whether mom or dad is addicted or that sort of thing. It's no longer like there's a clear leader and a clear direction that we're going, and we're not achieving that desired outcome. When we have that chaotic family system, it's limited or erratic leadership where they step in occasionally and step out and become absent altogether. Inconsistent consequences. Today you got in trouble for it, but you got away with it before, so you just don't know which one that's going to look like. A lot of negotiation or almost like endless negotiations where it becomes really hard to nail down kind of expectations, because oftentimes it can lead to like, well, you did this, so I'm going to do this, and fine, whatever. There isn't that good cohesive aspect. It's low emotional bonding because of all those chaotic aspects of it. With the frequent rule change, the inconsistent leadership, inconsistent consequences, obviously there's a less level of bonding. In the rigid aspect, it's far more predictable, but it's so strict, so unmoving that it tends to create low emotional bonding because there's no flexibility in consequences where it's really strict and rigid. And there absolutely are cases where we need to be strict and rigid with consequences. And there are some things where we are like, hey, I'm noticing some good changes in this direction. I can ease up a little bit over here. And so in that healthy families dynamic, we really want flexibility. However, in that rigid aspect, it keeps people separated, but at least one of the aspects is it keeps everything super strict and it's typically somewhat predictable, but it's also scary and a little bit of tough, cold, unconnected. Now that we know ultimately what addiction does and how it breaks down the family, we recognize that when it comes to recovery, it's not just up to the addicted loved one to seek help, but all of us. Since we are all part of the system and we all are at least indirectly impacted, it's helpful to recognize what role I play and how this has impacted me. So then that way, when my addicted loved one comes back from treatment or they're continuously getting better, I can be in that supportive place where I can make sure there's room, because ultimately it has such an impact on us all.